I'd like to begin by welcoming you all to this panel discussion on floods in Pakistan, and by thanking Grace Cardono, Stephanie Abbott-Pandey, and Ellen White at the Saxena Center for Contemporary South Asia and the Watson Center at Brown for organizing all the logistics and the technical details that made this possible. The biggest thanks is to my co-organizer, Dr. Ehsan Kamal, who has carried the bulk of the labor in organizing this with his characteristic care and thoughtfulness. So a little overview for the panel. Like many of you, I assume, in the aftermath of the flooding in various parts of Pakistan this summer, I was preoccupied with the catastrophic levels of devastation and displacement that was caused by them. And it was in conversation with Ehsan that the idea for this panel came together, which is quite simple. It's to put into the forefront the issues of expertise and knowledge making in our responses to climate disaster. Basically, the question of who gets to define the problems that led to this disaster, how it should best be addressed, and who might be responsible for this. While the voice of experts, particularly climate scientists, is undeniably important to these questions, we also thought to center those perspectives that unfortunately don't always make it into these conversations. And this includes those who've been experiencing, witnessing, and navigating the realities of climate catastrophe, specifically in Pakistan in this case, through long-standing political organizing and resistance, and those who are pushing how we think and respond to the question of environmental ruin through political education, theater, and art. And I'm hoping that with the perspective of the brilliant panelists that we have today, we can build on how we understand the complex relationship between environment, ecology, development, and politics in Pakistan today. So a quick overview is that Ehsan and I will now introduce the panelists, and then Ehsan will share some remarks. And I also wanted to share the format very quickly with the audience, so you know how it's going to proceed. We'll ask questions in rounds, starting with Fazal, then Marvi, and then Zulfikar. Then we'll have some closing questions for all three speakers, and this will approximately go on for about an hour and 15 minutes. So that's 12:15 p.m. EST and 10:15 p.m. Pakistan time. And we'll then open up for 45 minutes of Q&A, ending hopefully on time at 1 p.m. EST and 11 p.m. Pakistan time. So I'll start with the introductions for Marvi and Zulfikar, and Ehsan will give us an introduction for Fazal. So Marvi Latifi teaches linguistics at the University of Sindh in Jamshoro. She's worked in Hyderabad as a political organizer with the Women's Democratic Front and the Awami Workers' Party in Pakistan. She's been active in feminist politics on the ground around a range of issues at the intersection of capitalism and patriarchy, and more recently has been very actively involved in the flood relief effort in Sindh. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto is an artist and a curator whose work takes on a range of themes, from religion to questions of futurity and ecology. And his current project, Bulhaname, seeks to understand the cultural, ecological, and social history of the Indus River, a site that's been crucial to the recent floods. And he seeks to understand the social history of the Indus River through the eyes of one of Pakistan's most elusive animals, the Indus River dolphin. And the beautiful image of needlework on the poster for the panel today is Zulfikar's wonderful work. Over to you, Ehsan.
Thank you, Zara. Before I introduce our third panelist, I just wanted to also say a few words of thanks. Zara has always been wonderful and very, very supportive and full of energy, positive energy when organizing these things. So, of course, this panel we couldn't have put together without her positive energies. I also wanted to thank Saxena Center and Brown University staff for helping organize this panel, as well as my home institution, the National Institution of Pakistan Studies at the Quaid-e-Azam University, QAU. For us at QAU, this panel is a part of events, seminars, and conferences on climate change and floods. And for instance, we have a day-long conference planned in mid-December. And Zara and I have also collaborated with and plans to collaborate on other panels with other Global North institutions. And our third panelist is Fazle Rablund. Fazle Rablund is a Saraiki political, cultural, and social activist based in Dera Ghazi Khan. His ancestral village Khumman lies in the strip between Indus River and the Kohe Sulman mountain ranges, which is an area of heavy flooding. That whole entire strip is an area of heavy flooding. Fazl has been active in Saraiki cultural and political activities since his youth. He is a trained theater performer specializing in street and political theater. He is the founder of Para Development Foundation, and under this organization, Fadil has overseen many debt cancellation, food sovereignty, and water infrastructure related campaigns, particularly targeting the role of the international financial institutions in building these structures. Fazil has been a key organizer with local movements and people's tribunals around these mega development projects, particularly the Chashma Lok Sat and the Sindh Sagar Sat. And he's also part of the Saraiki cultural movement and under the umbrella of Saraiki Lok Sanj. So before we turn to the formal conversation, I just wanted to share some brief thoughts and share a couple of maps with you, but it will be a mistake to think of the 2022 floods as anything other than southern ruinations at the hands of the North. Here, the North, of course, includes the G8, but we must begin by acknowledging how the US and the consumption drives of the residents in the global North have left Southerners in ruins. But the North also extends beyond the boundaries of these nation states. It includes the North-oriented states, market institutions, and elite social formations that are equally culpable in the crime of Southern destruction. The North names the orientation towards the consumptive, destructive, capitalist, colonial, imperial world, and the North is the name of the ruination and destruction of the South. If the floods are a symptom of turning the world upside down, where rivers no longer flow freely, where rains no longer fall as expected, then perhaps this condition of being, this southness of being, is an outcome of enlisting rivers, lands, and bodies in the modern cycles of consumption and production. And through these cycles, the North constantly destroys and reanimates the South. And if the condition of southness is a northern creation through the destruction of a variety of life worlds and ways of being, then today we listen to Southern activists, intellectuals, and artists who are reflecting both on this destruction and the possibility of their existence. So let me just set the stage by sharing a couple of maps with you so that everyone kind of like has an idea of what we're talking about. So you can see, I hope on your screen, just the political map of Pakistan, and the blue areas are all of these flooded areas. Now, if I move my cursor, then we're looking at this narrow strip, which is the Daman strip area where Fazl sort of belongs from. And if I kind of like keep moving down, then we are looking at this massive flooding zone in the borders of Balochistan and Sindh province, and then all the way down to the Indus Delta region as well, and these have been some of the hotspots of the current flooding. And I just wanted to also just quickly share the, you can see that these flooding has, if you follow these lines that represent the rivers, then you see that most of the flooding areas have been just very close to these hills, the Kohe Sulman Hills and the Kirthar Hills. And we hope that through our discussion, some of the panelists can shed light on the particular nature of these these floods, and so that we can sort of think about how to move beyond this and how to move towards the issues and debates of climate justice. I also just shared accidentally, but just maybe appropriately, that these floods are a massive phenomena across South Asia, and they're very sort of they're not a unique event. They're happening quite frequently. In fact, I was reading, as we often do about these disasters, that the total combined deaths during the floods of 2022 has been the highest since 2020. So it's not been too long before we've had sort of massive flooding across South Asia of this magnitude. So with this kind of like broader context in mind, I will now turn to our first panelist. Let me just pause this share. Right, so I'll turn to Fazal first of all. And let me just also mention that Fazal will be speaking his responses in Urdu, and I will also ask him questions in Urdu, but I'll sort of speak them first in English. And once he's done with his response, I will provide a sort of a brief summary of of his key points. So, Fazal Sain?
जी सही.
बस मैं अभी आपसे सवाल पूछता हूँ, तो फिर वो उसके जो जब आप जवाब दे दें तो फिर मैं 2 मिनट के लिए ना समराइज करूंगा उसको अंग्रेजी में, और फिर हम आगे बात करेंगे. ठीक है?
ठीक है.
जी, तो मेरा my first question is about the current situation in the Saraiki areas, the areas that Fazal belongs to, and in relation to the floods, and what has been the response of the various government organization. Fazal Sain, बताएं हमें कि क्या सूरत हाल रही है सैलाब की आपके इलाके में, और ये हुकूमती इदारों का उस सिलसिले में क्या रिस्पांस रहा है?
सैलाब की वजह से हमारे इलाके में बहुत बड़ी तबाही और बर्बादी हुई है, और अभी तक वही हालात चल रहे हैं, और अभी तक पानी बहुत सारी जगहों पे 7-7, 8-8 फुट खड़ा हुआ है. फर्स्ट डे से एट दिस टाइम अभी तक गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से किसी किस्म का कोई रेस्पॉन्स नहीं मिला. मकामी लोगों और सिविल सोसाइटी के कुछ लोगों ने लोगों को शुरू में राशन, तो कुछ रिलीफ मेडिकल कैंप्स और कुछ रिहेबिलिटेशन का जितना मकामी लोग और बाहर से कुछ सिविल सोसाइटी के कुछ लोग कर रहे हैं. पंजाब हुकूमत, पीडीएमए, एनडीएमए से किसी किस्म का अभी तक कोई 1 रुपए का ना कोई राशन में, ना कोई रेस्क्यू में, ना और अभी बहाली में किसी किस्म का कोई रेस्पॉन्स नहीं, जीरो रेस्पॉन्स है.
Esin, you're muted.
Thank you, Zara. So Fazal was just giving us an update on the situation of floods in the Saraiki areas. He's mentioned that floods have led to a mass-scale destruction, and it's been about over 3 months, but still in many parts of the area, there's water standing up to 7 to 8 feet. And that has caused a level of destruction that these areas don't see. And in terms of the response from the government authorities, there hasn't been any response from the government. The government has been absent on the ground. It's primarily been a response by the local people in terms of relief provision, and civil society organization from outside have also helped. But the government, particularly the Punjab provincial government, has been pretty much absent from the scene in terms of provision of relief as well. So now I will ask Fazal more about the causes of these damage. Of course, these are unique. These are often seen as uniquely attributable to climate change and unusual rain patterns. But I will inquire whether there has been similar floods in the past and what could have caused these floods. फजल साईं, ये जो आपको नजर आता है ये सारा जो डैमेज हुआ है, ये क्या, ये आप इसके बारे में थोड़ा सा बताएंगे कि इसकी वजूहात क्या हैं? ये क्या क्लाइमेट चेंज की वजह से है? इस तरह के फ्लड्स पहले भी आते रहे हैं? तो इस पे अगर आप थोड़ी सी रोशनी डाल दें.
क्लाइमेट चेंज तो सो है, लेकिन हमारे इलाके में जो तबाही और बर्बादी हुई है, खसूसन डेरा गाजी खान और राजनपुर के अंदर जो कोसलमान से रोदकुइयां आई हैं, अगर उनमें जो ये इनकी गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से तामीरात हैं, जो वाटर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर है और जो इंडस हाईवे है, और खसूसन उसमें चश्मा राइट बैंक कैनाल और कच्ची कैनाल, तो इस फ्लड और बारिशों से बड़ी तबाही उनकी वजह से हुई है। ये राजनपुर और डेरा गाजी खान दमान का इलाका कहलाता है। ये वो पट्टी है जो दरियाए सिंध और को सुलेमान के दरमियान में है, कुछ 300 किलोमीटर के लगभग। तो मगरब में है को सुलेमान, मशरिक में है दरियाए सिंध, और जो रोदकुइयां आती हैं वो आती है को सुलेमान से मगरब से मशरिक की तरफ। तो इन्होंने उस दमान रीजन के अंदर शुमाल और जनूब नहरें डिजाइन कर दी हैं, जिसमें एक कच्ची कैनाल है और दूसरी चश्मा राइट बैंक कैनाल है। अब इस सुलेमान रेंज में दमान के अंदर हर 7-8 किलोमीटर के बाद एक रोदकुई है जो को सुलेमान से आती है। तो जब अब इतनी लंबी कैनाल्स और वो भी मुस्तकिल रुकावट है रोदकुइयों के, क्योंकि उनका जो बैंक है कच्ची कैनाल के बैंक, आपको ऐसा कुछ तजर्बा भी है, देखा हुआ है आपका वो इलाका, मतलब 200-300 फुट का बैंक है जो उसका राइट बैंक है कच्ची कैनाल का। उसमें जब रोदकुई को सुलेमान से आती है वो तो फिर पानी 300-400 फुट 250 फुट उसकी बुलंदी, वो तो पानी को डैम करता रहता है, डैम करता रहता है। आखिरकार जब पानी की मिकदार बढ़ जाती है तो वो उस बैंक को हिट करता है, तो फिर वो कच्ची कैनाल आगे मजीद बर्बादी करती है पूरे उसके कच्ची कैनाल के नीचे और कच्ची कैनाल के साउथ और नॉर्थ में, मतलब शुमाल और जनूब में, हर दोनों साइड पे। और यही कहानी दोहराई गई है चश्मा के अंदर, सीआरबीसी के अंदर, वो भी इसी तरह है। दूसरा, इन नहरों की वजह से रोदकुइयों के जो कुदरती गुजरगाहें थी हिस्टोरिकल, वो डिस्टर्ब हुई हैं। तो इन्होंने उनके लिए जो सुपर पैसेज या सैफन डिजाइन किए हैं, उनके डिजाइन ही गलत है। सीआरबीसी के ऊपर आपका भी वो है, आपने आंखों से देखा हुआ है कि जो सुपर पैसेज या सैफन है वो बहुत ऊंचे हैं और बहुत छोटे साइज के हैं। रोद को यहाँ बड़ी बड़ी आती हैं, तो वो इस पूरे पानी की जो एल्टुरेंट्स आते हैं रोद को यहाँ को सुलेमान से, उनकी मुकम्मल निकासी नहीं कर सकते, और इसीलिए फिर वो ब्रीच करती हैं चश्मा को और इसी तरह कच्ची कैनाल को। नीचे आके पूरी की पूरी वो तबाही हो जाती है। ऊपर का जो हिस्सा है उसमें पानी डैम हो जाता है। आपने शायद देखी हूं, मैंने कोई 1 हफ्ता पहले तस्वीरें डाली हैं सोशल मीडिया पे, मतलब कई किलोमीटर तक चश्मा राइट बैंक कैनाल का जो राइट बैंक है उसने अभी तक 8-9-10 फुट पानी डैम किया हुआ है कई किलोमीटर तक। अगर ये इस तरह की इनकी कैनाल्स की और इनके सुपर पैसेज सैफन की और ड्रेनेज की गलत डिजाइनिंग ना होती तो रोद को यहाँ अगर अपने रिवायती और तारीखी रास्तों से गुजर कर सीधा दरियाए सिंध के अंदर चली जाती तो ये इतनी बड़ी तबाही ना होती कभी भी। दूसरा, इन कैनाल की वजह से जो पानी लोगों के लिए एक नेमत था, जो कि एग्रीकल्चर वाटर था, लोग जिसपे कास्ट किया करते थे, जिसपे खेत हुआ करते थे, इन नहरों की वजह से एक फिनोमेना ये डिपार्टमेंट वालों ने उसे रोद को यूं को फ्लड वाटर डिक्लेयर कर दिया है, जबकि वो फ्लड वाटर है ही नहीं। तो एक उस गलत फहमी ने, दूसरा जो रोदकुई का डिपार्टमेंट है उसको खत्म करके रोदकुई कुइयों को शिफ्ट कर दिया गया है इरिगेशन वालों को। इरिगेशन डिपार्टमेंट रोदकुइयों की साइंस उसको बिल्कुल किसी किस्म की समझ नहीं है। वो कैनाल की तरह पानी नहीं बहता, उसका अपना एक बहाव है, अपना एक तरीकाकार है जिससे इरिगेशन वाले वाकिफ नहीं है। तो इस पे उन्होंने कुछ प्रोजेक्ट लॉन्च किए, कुछ रोदकुइयों पे तजर्बे किए हैं कि डिवर्टिंग चैनल्स बनाए हैं उनके दर्रा में को सुलेमान जहां खत्म होता है। पहले वहां पे होते थे मड का स्ट्रक्चर से लोग अपनी मदद आप और रोदकुई डिपार्टमेंट वाले बैंक बनाते थे, पानी को तकसीम करते थे। अब इन्होंने जब से वहां पे कंक्रीट स्ट्रक्चर के वो डिवर्टिंग चैनल बनाए हैं उसको पानी बहा के ले नहीं जा सकता। मड वाले जब पानी की मिकदार ज्यादा होती थी तो उसको पानी अपने साथ बहा के ले जाता था, वो इधर उधर तबाही नहीं करता था। अब इस स्ट्रक्चर को तो रोज कुइयां नहीं बहा सकती, लेकिन होता क्या है कि कोसुलेमान पहाड़ी सिलसिला कच्चा सिलसिला है। इस रोध कुइयों के अंदर में बड़ी मिकदार में बहुत बड़ा सिल्ट आता है। वो इनके स्ट्रक्चर को एक दो जो डिवर्टिंग चैनल है, एक दो दफा वो सिल्ट अप कर देता है, उसका मुंह बंद हो जाता है। तो फिर जो रोध कुई का जो तकसीम होनी होती है 5-6 हिस्सों में, वो एक ही हिस्से की तरफ चली जाती है, तो पूरी तबाही और बर्बादी कर देती है। अभी मैं आप जो मेरे घर की रोध कुई है वो आपने देखी हुई है, खसूसन एक मिसाल दे देता हूं कि सोरी लुंड, उसने शादन लुंड से सीधा दरियाए सिंध में गिरना होता है। मेरी आंखों के सिवा मेरी 50 साल उम्र में वो उधर ही गिरती रही है दरियाए सिंध में। अब उसका जो रास्ता है कि वो मेरे गांव से ऊपर आके इन्होंने ड्रेन बंद कर दी है, नीचे दरियाए सिंध तक ड्रेन जाती ही नहीं है। तो जिस रोज कोई ने गिरना था शादन लुंड में, वो चली गई डीडी खान शहर तक बर्बाद करती हुई। तो उस रोध कुई को 50 किलोमीटर जनूब में ये कच्ची कनाल का और इनका जो ड्रेनेज का जिसे ये डेवलपमेंट कह रहे हैं, उस इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर ने 50 किलोमीटर साउथ में धकेल दिया और वो पूरे 50 किलोमीटर साउथ में तबाही और बर्बादी करती गई।
शुक्रिया फजल साहब, मैं इसका तर्जुमा करता हूँ, फिर आप फिर हम अगले राउंड में आगे चलेंगे मारवी की तरफ। फिर आपके पास मैं दोबारा आऊंगा तो उस वक्त IFIs वगैरह का रोल और उस पर हम बात करेंगे। What I asked about the sort of causes of these floods in this area, why is there still 3 months after the flooding water standing at that level? And Fazal's response is that well, it is partly attributable to climate change. There has been unprecedented rains, but the main problem in two of the districts in those areas, DG Khan and Rajanpur, is the blockage of the natural drainage pathway of the spate irrigation system. It's a traditional irrigation system based on management of the hill torrent systems. By building earthen embankments through collective and communal efforts, which is then used to divert water into fields, and which was used to then create lots of different crops and give pretty much life to that whole entire region. And the region that we're talking about is in about 300-kilometer long strip of land between the Indus River and the Kohe Salman mountain ranges. These are the dry mountain ranges from which the hill torrents flow from west to the east, from the mountain in the west to the rivers in the east. And what had happened is that gradually this old irrigation system was dismantled. The department handling and dealing with this irrigation system was just closed, and new modern canal irrigation systems were introduced in these areas. And these canals flow from the north to the south, parallel to the river, and they block the path of these hill torrents that are that used to reach the river. And basically, if you go into that area, and I've been sort of in those areas myself, witnessed this myself, that in order to protect these modern irrigation canals, which is a heavy investment by the state, they build embankments. In some places, these embankments can be about 100 to 150 feet tall. And so if there's a lot of flood water coming from the mountains, then these embankments act as dams and they raise the water level. And then when the water kind of overtops these structures, these embankments, then it can break these canals and wreak havoc in the communities that are in the downstream area of these regions. So what Fazil also very interestingly pointed out is that in a way what the designers of these canals, the modern canal irrigation system, what they've done is that they have not only taken away the fertility of the water that used to give life to the entire region, but they have also basically turned this water into flood water. In fact, the water flowing from the mountains is now classified as flood water, whereas previously it was used by the locals as the source of life in the region. So, and then another particular design flaw that Fazal mentioned about these canals is because there has to be some passageways for the water to flow. So the designers put some kind of like passageways. Sometimes these go under the canal, sometimes they go over the canal. But all of these designs, and it's a well documented on the record finding by inspection panels, that these are either too high, so they don't allow the flood water to go, or they're built in the wrong direction. So Fazal gives the example of his own village, Ghumman, which is right next to one particular hill torrent called the Suri Lund. And previously, before these structures, the water from the mountains will flow right close to his village and move without any obstructions all the way to the Indus River and drain there. Now, with these new designs, what they have done is they've tried to consolidate the water from multiple streams and pass them through particular points. So Suri Lund now has to go down 50 kilometers south. Remember, these hill torrents flow from west to east. Now they are sort of pushed to flow down southwards and into a particular location to cross over the canals and the highways that have been built. And this creates a convergence of energy, and then that further kind of creates destruction, whether if you're in the path of these floods, and it kind of like also limits the drainage pathways that these hill torrents naturally used to have. So instead of the traditional way of harnessing the energy and dissipating the energy of these hill torrents, what has happened is that they are now converged into specific locations. And that's why in some places where there's a lot of energy, the water just bursts through and creates flash floods. And in other places, it doesn't find any way to get out. So for even after 3 months, this is kind of like water that is still standing there. So we're going to follow up on some of these things with Fazal, and we're going to ask him about the role of international institutions in building these structures and what does that mean for climate justice. But we want to compare what kind of, whether these patterns are being repeated elsewhere in the flood affected areas as well. So for that, I'll turn to Zahra to ask the next questions. Thank you.
So now I'll turn to Marvi, and for those of you who have just joined us, just a quick recap on the introductions. That Marvi works as a political organizer in Hyderabad in Sindh, and especially is an incredible feminist political organizer, and has been very active with the flood relief effort in Sindh. So on that note, I'll ask Marvi to tell us what the situation is currently in Sindh, and a little bit about her work around flood relief, and what some of the biggest obstacles to providing relief have been, and what the biggest problems have been that they've faced in providing relief.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very grateful to all the organizers for organizing this program and panelist discussion and having me with you all. Well, the situation in Sindh is exacerbating in many ways because as Sain Fazal just explained, that since more than 3 months have been passed of catastrophic flooding and rains, but still some of the areas are under water in Sindh. And because of mismanagement and absence of representatives, actually water is receding inch by inch, eventually resulting in waterborne diseases, healthcare crisis, and of course, let's say a flood crisis affecting millions. In Sindh alone, 10 million people have been displaced. 792 have died, and most of them are, you see, women and children. Almost 90% of Sindh crops have been inundated in terms of, let's say, people have lost a number of tens of thousands of cattle. And let me just mention here that only in Sindh, there are 50,000 women in reproductive age as well. So much so that a number of people have just reduced to begging, because families have been now on the whims of either, let's say, civil bureaucracy or landlords or charities. No doubt, as just Asan just explained, that this year Pakistan had received unprecedented rains, but because of warmer air and high pressure at sea. But you see, this whole turned into man-made catastrophe because of poor infrastructure, mega development projects, and even the ruthless absence of our representatives. In all three phases, pre-disaster, let's say in rescuing the people, even during the disaster, providing immediate relief, and after disaster, like providing a rehab. Let me just mention here that after, let's say, 2010, 11, 12 floods, in 2013, officials were required to restore all natural waterways, desilting of drains, even stopping deforestation, ensuring to, let's say, stop any kind of construction on the natural flows. But eventually, nothing has happened after 9 years. And let me just quickly mention the role of media in this as well, that media and representatives are suffering from already, let's say, memory loss, because they have forgotten this man-made catastrophe, not even talking about it. What they talk about, that who wins and loses in this power politics, or get the shares in the patronage state as well. So you see, it's not about only the flooding, but our whole livelihood, let's say our livestock, our even heritage, as beautifully narrated by the poet laureate of Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai, are all in, let's say, danger. Let me just mention here what said by Adil Khan in Pakistan's Sindhi Ethnic Nationalism article, that the population of the richest province is the second poorest in the country. Well, just turning to the second part of your question related to the work WDF is doing. So Women Democratic Front has been trying since the flood to reach the most affected people by collecting funds or organizing the camps as well. And we are even thankful to all those who have contributed in our solidarity relief work. And WDF is not only, let's say, put her work in terms of only in Sindh, but also we try to reach in Balochistan, Saraiki Paseb, and Swat as well. Well, if I particularly talk about Sindh, we provided especially sanitary kits to women, and essentials to pregnant women, and even baby food, because what happens in these 10 cities and medical camps, that there hardly you find any baby food, and so most of the time kids are acutely malnourished. And our work is especially situated in Kambar Shahidadkot, northwest of Sindh, one of the worst hit areas in worst hit district in terms of flooding. Well, we also, let's say, finding out the acute shortage in terms of medicine and cripples medical camps by Sindh government. So we decided to focus on organizing medical camps. And with our sister organizations, as you just mentioned, Awami Workers Party and PRSF, we have had organized 45 medical camps so far, and is still, let's say, continuing this thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marvi, for that overview. I guess, so you touched on a lot of questions that I had also about, that this is not just a geographical problem, but also political, economic, and governance related problem. But if you could speak a little bit more specifically also to the problems with drainage of flood water in Sindh, because I think what we hear a lot is, oh, Sindh is low-lying, and so that's why there's water standing there. And so it's sort of attributed to this natural geography, but of course there's more to the story, and you've already spoken a bit about it. But specifically, what is causing, in your view, some of these particular issues with drainage?
Yes, thank you. You see, yes, as you just mentioned that because of the topography of Sindh, that we have a lower stream, and because of that lower stream having a mild slope or even a mild absorption in soil. But because of this, you see a mild slope, ecosystem had provided us with a service called as sheet flow. And with the sheet flow, we had a number of, let's say, water flows as well, and natural water ways, as just mentioned by Sai Fazal Saab. So you see, floods and rains historically had formed these drains, and in Sindh we had also we have 18 natural waterways and flows, and we call them as a dhora. If I just quickly show you the image, just allow me. Yes, just show you this. Can you see the image? Yes, here it is. Yes, can you see the image?
Yes.
Okay, so here, if I
Maybe
just,
you exited it.
so
Yes.
these all are the floras. Yes, these all are the natural, you say, yes. So we have a number of Dhoro Puran or Hakro Dhoro, but these all are obstructed because of the, you see, man-made designs, and as let me just finish. Let me just close this. Oh, 1 minute. Uh-huh. 1 minute. Okay. Yes. So we have had another dried river, Ghagro Hakro River, that used to flow during monsoon rains and helping in natural flows as well. But you see, when British just informed us that, hold on, we know more about Indus than the inhabitants, and constructed Sakhar Barrage, as mentioned by Fazal Sai, that canal system was initiated. And this canal system actually obstructed our all natural as well. And if I just talk about that, since the British, or after, let's say, means this partition, our state authorities continue such same mega projects as we have, like they just built, constructed other barrages like LBOT barrages, and then other mega projects as well in terms of LBOD, left bank outfall drain, and then RBOD, right bank outfall drain. By the capitalist and imperialist, you see, banks, international banks like World Bank and Asian Development Bank. So, and they are not only destroying the Indus River, Indus Delta, but also destroying the other rivers and lakes, as I just mentioned, uh, river. So here I just want to mention that natural flows were turned into or converted into survey lands, or they were declared as survey lands to construct further, let's say, farms, either industries, even agricultural land, in order to further obstruct our natural flows. And with all these colonial profiteering model, you see what it is like, why they are imposed to intact the stakes of either military or the landlords or even the feudals in our society. So here, if I just quickly talk about that during the construction of LBOT, especially to Dhora, as I just mentioned, that there are a number of natural flows in Sindh as well, but especially Puran and Hakro drain were refrained from natural flow. And since Irrigation and Drainage Authority, SIDA, in 2013 provided a report and required to restore all these drains and even stop them from encroachment as well. But as I just mentioned, that Sindh government, instead of, let's say, stopping them, but further facilitate these mega projects as well. I will quickly just mention that, as Sai Fazal mentioned, that sim canals, or let's say other drains, are also constructed on the natural flows, clogging the water flows. And here we should not forget, especially about the highways, roads, and all the railway tracks as well that are built, that have been built, let's say 4 to 6 feet above on the ground, and eventually, let's say, not considering the hydrology and feel like they are kind of mounds. So in such a scenario, we can't say that it's a natural disaster, but a kind of a man-made catastrophe. We talk about here the destructive role by the landlords in Sindh who just like fiefdom, control, administrative order as well, power as well, and also economic power as well. And the number of cases we have seen in this flood as well, that how landlords have brutally breached a number of embankments in order to just save their lands. I will just quickly give you one example that in Badin, one of the, yes, in Badin, Fort Haji Babar, people were actually trying to fortify the embankment or bank, but it was brutally breached by the, let's say, landlords over there. And in Judo subdivision, it is said that in order to save the Tharkul road, they just still water has yet to be receded from Judo. And another example of Khairpur Nathan Shah, I think it is people like know about this, was one of the worst hit area, and it could have been saved had the landlords not intervened and in order to again save their lands. But I just want to mention here the efforts by common people, like the people on the ground as well, who saved Johi and Meher by fortifying their embankments, especially women, and who worked, let's say, for 5 days and just saved it. Last but not the least, of course, the dams have also elevated the devastation, and still our authorities are obsessed with dams. So a number of dams have been broken. Some say that 50, or even some but I can't say that we have an exact report of it. But I just want to mention here that in Kutch also, like in Sindh, small dams have been broken. So it's like a colonial-led capitalist model that is actually destroying the 40 years of our heritage. And now the Indus is talking to us or telling us that how ferocious it can be if we just stop its way. So it's like the Indus River is only reclaiming its way. The Jehu Panje samudra tai pahunchi sake to reach to the sea. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marve. That is, there's so much there to unpack. I suppose one of the things that you're talking about is this timeline, right? So how this is, of course, has a really long history, and then there was a recognition that this is a problem. This kind of building on these drains, on these drains, on these natural flows is a problem. Yet nothing was done about it. So I was wondering, flooding is not new to Pakistan. It's definitely not new to Sindh, and we've had the 2010 super floods as well. So if you were to sort of compare, how these today's floods, this past summer, were similar or different in terms of their impact or causes, if you could speak briefly to that.
Yes, I will just quickly talk about it. First, you see, we need to understand that floods are mighty advantages for the life of river, and they are even lifeline for river, as like Darya Sindh ke Chaiwa, Sindh Darya ke Nai Chayo. Sindh owes its existence to the inter rivers, not only let's say geographically, but socially, even culturally, historically, and even in terms of economic ways. So Sindh and let's say the river can survive coexistically, as happened or has been with the case with our
Marvi, you froze for me. Can anybody else hear Marvi?
Yeah, I think she's frozen. Maybe we give it a couple of seconds and then we can move on. And,
yeah.
Right.
Hane, I think.
Okay, I think maybe we continue, and when Marvi joins us, we can sort of give her a chance to finish. So Zara, just to pick up from this, a couple of themes seem to be emerging here. I mean, not only is it that this flooding are attributed to climate change, where we can sort of point fingers towards the global north for its emissions, but also the role of these mega infrastructure development projects and particular kind of ideologies around the productive use of water, often funded and promoted by institutions like the World Bank. And these are, in a way, the root cause behind why the water is still standing in these locations. So something really sort of clearly articulated by both speakers. So I see Marvi is back, and maybe we'll move on to Zulfikar, and then Marvi can sort of jump in the second round. Zulfikar, you've been very active during the flood relief operations, and you've been organizing medical camps. And can you tell us about your experience of witnessing these floods across Sindh?
Firstly, I hope everyone can hear me, firstly, most importantly. And then also, thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor and a privilege to be amongst such incredible speakers who are doing really a lot of work. A lot of legwork and a lot of brain work to try and figure out what exactly is happening in our country. I think a lot has sort of been laid out and said in terms of the sort of technicalities of everything. In terms of, you're asking me what have I seen? I mean, I've seen a lot of what Ms. Marvi and Saim Fazle have seen, which is just utter devastation. It's like war. People are in a state of shock. People are in a state of trauma. When we set up our medical camps, there were, of course, people with really horrifying skin diseases, and I think that's been fairly well documented. I'm not sure if the world has seen it, but children whose whole bodies are covered in fungal diseases, and as well as issues that are simply related to also malnourishment pre-flood, owing to the fact that wealth has not been equally distributed in Pakistan for well, since the British, and even before, of course. So I mean, even pre-Pakistan, this idea of an equal distribution of wealth has not touched Pakistan for a long time. So people are dealing with issues of malnourishment. There is a terrible stench in the air from all the rotting carcasses of cattle that litter the highway. There is a mixing of rainwater with sewage, and people are coming to us asking for medicine for anxiety, you know, not just for their children, but for anxiety because they can't sleep at night. So people are traumatized, and I think this is something that the Western media really isn't really understanding. I was asked in an interview. I was on an interview once on an American show, and I won't name which one it was, but there was a Ukraine segment just before mine, and they spent a good 20 minutes talking about Ukraine and everything to do with Ukraine, and even more, all this extra stuff. Then they came to me and said, okay, you have 10. And I said, of course I didn't say anything, I was polite, but the way I was rushed through speaking about what is a warlike situation, what is, you know, it's a warlike situation, not, you know, not necessarily with the elements, but with such infrastructural chaos and such a crime that's been done to our geography and our environment over the past 100 years. So we're at war with something that a lot of people are not, those who can change it are not willing to change it, such as the canal irrigation system, such as infrastructure, such as the Indus Highway, which has acted like a dam, stopping water from entering the Indus. So those people who can change it are not willing to change it. And even this process of change, if it does happen, will take a very, very long time. There are whole ecosystems that have been built now with the canal irrigation system as well. So, you know, there's an opportunity cost involved as well in terms of our reconfiguring of how we prioritize damming and irrigation. There was a time when Sindh was a thinly populated place, and I can speak to Sindh specifically because it's where I'm from, but Sindh was a thinly populated area, and it was the British who brought sort of multitudes of people in order to farm their newly irrigated fields. And in terms of those who are sort of interested in this idea of the Indus Delta, this has already sort of been brought up briefly, but the Indus Delta doesn't start in Thatta. It in fact starts when the Indus enters Sindh. And it is probably as large, or maybe not as large actually, but it is large in its scope, much larger in its scope than we are able to actually comprehend. And these sort of substreams that Ms. Marvi was speaking to, you know, this was part of the dry delta. You know, this was a delta that went lush in the rainy season. And its population its indigenous population was specifically suited to that type of climate. But now where you know the landscape is so unrecognizable and so many people depend on canal irrigation, that this question of dams and barrages has become a very, very complicated one.
Well, thank you, Zulfikar. And speaking about the Indus Delta, of course, when we think about these massive flood events, there are kind of like a sort of an eye catcher in the sense of the scale of the destruction is massive and very visible and evident. Even then, there's so little attention. But there is also this long-term casualty, often reflected in sort of the death of both the human and non-human communities. And I'm also wanted to push you to talk a little bit about your recent sort of expedition on the Indus with sort of the tracing Bullen and your artwork around it. If you can sort of speak to the long-term effect of these projects, not just one sort of rain event that is destroying this ecology.
Oh, no, definitely. I mean, one, we all knew that this was a disaster waiting to happen in terms of the right bank, left bank sort of drainage canal system that the government had built that Saif Fazal brought up in the first part of this conversation. And everyone was also very, very acutely aware of the effect of barrages on the ecosystem. And one of the sort of largest effects of the barrage irrigation system that the Sindh Wildlife Department and Sindhi fishermen have been working very hard to rectify was the almost extinction of the Indus River dolphin. And many people had actually believed it went extinct after Guddu Barrage was built in 1962 with the assistance of the World Bank. We have to understand that the British gave us a foundation for how to dry out the river, but it was the Pakistani government along with the World Bank that did it, that was successful in this mission. So, you know, I mean, I think it's funny with this climate change conversation, it's very easy to relent accountability towards the international community. But there's a lot that we've done with the international community and in joint to the international community that are elected and non-elected officials must also be held accountable for. The extinction of the Indus River dolphin is one of those many crimes, the almost extinction of the Indus River dolphin. And if it weren't for the fact that a Swiss scientist or an Italian scientist called Giorgio Pillari had come to Pakistan curious and having heard from Jabbar and Mohana and Mirbur fishermen that there were still some river dolphins left in the river. Ironically, the very fishermen that used to hunt them informed him that there were still a few left. And it was his research, along with a family of 3 fishermen, Karamilahi, Nazir Mirani, and Karamilahi's brother, whose name is escaping me now, that they were able to study the dolphins, and that they were actually declared an endangered species with the Sindh Wildlife Act in 1972 or 73. I'm not sure exactly which date it was, but so I mean, my work with the Indus dolphin is taking me to some beautiful places in Pakistan. I went with various different wildlife departments in the WWF from Chashma Barrage by boat all the way down to the Saraiki Soaib on the border of Sindh and Punjab, just to count dolphins. We went without a motor. We went 30 kilometers a day. And for perspective, you can do that in 20 minutes in a car. And we did that in a full day from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And we lived in the Indus, we bathed in the Indus, we brushed our teeth in the Indus, we ate by the Indus. We lived in islands, and you really get to see up close how incredible this river system is. And I think people don't understand that the Indus is perhaps one of the most beautiful things, one of the most beautiful rivers I've ever seen. And you really understand what a crime has been committed to her. And you know, in Punjab, the Indus is an archipelago. It's thousands of islands. Some of them are 15 kilometers wide and 30 kilometers long. And then when she gets to Sindh, she drops the level and starts meandering, and she divides into several substreams, some of which the British made into canals, such as the Nara and the Hakra and these various other substreams, and some of which they blocked completely, which get unblocked whenever there's a major flood, such as in 2010, as well as now in 2022. And we see the true force of the river in these times of crisis. So I mentioned earlier that the Indus dolphin almost went extinct. I just want to say that through the efforts of fishermen and the Sindh Wildlife Department, the numbers of dolphins have gone from 120 in 1972 to 2,000 now. So a tenfold increase in 50 years. But people don't hunt them. Their main enemy is the canal irrigation system, because they get stuck in these canals every year. And these canals mostly dry out in the winter, and the Sindh Wildlife Department rushes to rescue them every year, about 20 or 30 dolphins. And it's their natural instinct to follow the canals, because their natural instinct is to follow the many meandering substreams of the Indus to find fish and to mate. They don't like mating in the mainstream. They don't like eating in the mainstream. They love to go into these little small streams. They're evolutionarily adapted to swimming in shallow water to catch these fish. So this is, I'm boring you all with this nerdy discussion about dolphins. I think 4 people have dropped since I started talking about it. But that's just to answer your question.
Thank you. No, I think it's endlessly fascinating, and I had the luck of traveling to some of these river islands with some fishers and activists near Tonsa Barrage, and just during the monsoons. And these are massive places with large animals living there, and lakes within these islands formed. So you have river and islands within those rivers, and lakes within those islands. So it's just like, yeah, it's a fascinating kind of world. Zulfikar, I'll come back to you about particularly about your artwork and sort of like how you think this connects with, but sort of would in this moment of environmental ruin, if very briefly, if you can sort of speak about the role of your art in terms of highlighting these kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be clear about art also. I think art is very important in highlighting these things. And I think art can bring us very close to an issue. People who are very far from an issue can be brought very close to an issue. And this was something that I think we had a problem with in Pakistan, is that there was such a disconnect between rural and urban, particularly when I say rural and urban, I really mean Karachi and the rest of the country. Karachi is so disconnected from the rest of Sindh. And people didn't really understand that until they weren't getting vegetables in the supermarket, until they weren't getting essentials. And I think this is one, of course, is the economic effect that'll make people realize this, but it's also art that can help people realize this, which is why I started the map series about the changing, which is what one of them you've put as the poster, about the changing course of the Indus over 5,000 years. Which is a blip in the Indus's history. The Indus is about 40 million years old, by the way. or 30 million years old. So it's 5,000 years is nothing. But I think art is not enough. Of course, I think, you know, especially when we were doing our relief work and setting up our camps, I mean, how far can you go if you're not a government, if you're not in charge of policy, if you're not in charge of huge, vast amounts of money that are needed to help people and save people and rebuild people's homes? You can only do so much. And yes, it's effective and it's needed. And, you know, helping one person is still helping one person. I do believe in all of that, of course. But even Faisal Idi Saab, who's Idi Saab's son, the largest charity organization in Pakistan, which effectively takes the role of the state, he even says charity is not enough. And he's someone who lives purely off of charity. And I think in the same way, art is not enough. I encourage artists very much to talk about climate change. I encourage artists very much to make work about climate change, about the environment, about the ecosystem. This is an urgent issue, but with an end goal that it reaches some kind of policy stage. And I think this is something that I think is more essential.
Thank you so much. And just to mention, just to add that we are always limited in a panel like this to invite folks to invite, and there's excellent work done by Fisher folks across Sindh, and some excellent women activists, women leaders in these communities, and then we'll hope that we'll also have an opportunity to have them and speak about some of these issues that you highlight. Thank you, Zulfikar. Zaira?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much so far for everybody. Zulfikar, you spoke so beautifully about the beauty of the Indus that I think is also really important to keep in mind when we're thinking about devastation as, yeah, the way to have a much more kind of comprehensive view of what it is that we're potentially losing. So we're going to change speeds again a little bit and maybe go to talk about like politics and how actually this specific flooding event is connected to broader regional and national politics, and yeah, how those are interconnected. So I'll turn to Fazil and I'll ask my question in English first for the English speakers in this audience, and then I'll ask my question in Urdu to Fazil. So what I want to ask is, you know, Saraiki Viseb, many of you might be familiar, has had this very active, very strong movement for regional autonomy, with demands for a separate province for Saraikistan within, you know, outside of Punjab. And I wanted to ask Fazil how he sees these demands as central to the questions on and activism on issues of water infrastructure and climate change. तो फजल साहब, मैंने आपसे ये सवाल करना था कि सराइकी विसेक में एक बहुत अहम और बहुत मजबूत जदोजहद चली है बहुत सालों से सराइकी सूबा बनाने के हवाले से, जिसमें खुद मुख्तारी और कौमियत के बहुत अहम सवाल उठाए गए हैं। और आपकी नज़र में ये जो मूवमेंट है और इसकी सियासत का पानी के सवाल के साथ जो तरक्की के नाम पे प्रोजेक्ट्स, डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स बनाए गए हैं उनके साथ और या उनके खिलाफ, और फिर ये जो मौसम और माहौल की तब्दीली है जो हम देख रहे हैं, इन सब के साथ क्या ताल्लुक है? I hope Fazil is still with us.
जी मैं हूं आपके साथ।
जी, आपको आवाज आई मेरे सवाल की? मैं फिर से पूछूं?
आप दोहरा दें सवाल दोबारा तो ज्यादा बेहतर रहेगा।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, मैं आपसे ये पूछ रही थी कि जो सराइकी वसेब में एक बहुत जो अहम मूवमेंट चली है सराइकी सूबा बनाने के हवाले से, जिसमें खुद मुख्तारी, रीजनल ऑटोनॉमी, कौमियत के बहुत अहम सवाल उठाए गए हैं, आपकी नज़र में ये जो मूवमेंट है और इसका ताल्लुक सियासत का ताल्लुक पानी के सवाल के साथ क्या है, या फिर जो तरक्की के नाम पे प्रोजेक्ट्स, जो डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स बनाए गए हैं, इनके साथ क्या इसकी टेंशन में आती है, इसके खिलाफ मूवमेंट है, और इन साथ साथ पे ये जो मौसम और माहौल की जो तब्दीली हम देख रहे हैं, इन सब के साथ क्या ताल्लुक है?
जी सराइकी रीजन के साथ सराइकी लोगों का जो पानी का मसला है या पाकिस्तान में जो पानी की सियासत है, ये हमारी जिंदगी और मौत का मसला है। हम दरियाए सिंध के सबसे बड़े स्टेक होल्डर हैं और हमसे पूछे बगैर इस तरह के मेगा प्रोजेक्ट सराइकी पूरे रीजन को उसको इग्नोर करके, जबकि हमारी इरसा में भी किसी किस्म की इस वक्त तक कोई नुमाइंदगी नहीं है, तो हम तो इस तरह के किसी तरह के मेगा प्रोजेक्ट्स को जो पानी के ऊपर हैं मानते ही नहीं है सिरे से। और खसूसन जो सराइकी रीजन के अंदर कैनाल कॉलोनियलाइजेशन है, जहां जहां पे ये इनकी नहर आती है उस पानी के साथ बहता हुआ आबादकार भी आता है जो हमारी जमीनों के ऊपर कब्जे करता है। ये पानी का जो इशू है या पानी के ऊपर जो इनके मेगा प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, ये सबसे बड़ा अजाब और सबसे बड़ा सर्द दर्द हम सराइकियों का ही है। जो सबसे बड़े स्टेक होल्डर हैं, जो इस धरती के वासी हैं, उनको से कोई पूछता ही नहीं है। ये रिकॉर्ड के ऊपर है कि पानी एक और नहर जो डेवलपमेंट की शक्ल जो इनका नैरेटिव बयानिया जिन्होंने बनाया होता है, ख्वाब होता है। लेकिन इसके बावजूद ये रिकॉर्ड के ऊपर है कि हमने सीआरबीसी चश्मा राइट बैंक कैनाल की मुखालफत की थी। हमने कहा था उसी वक्त कि ये जो कैनाल आप ला रहे हैं इसके ये डिजाइन फेलियर हैं, ये कभी भी कामयाब नहीं हो सकेगी। और इस साल इस फ्लड के अंदर पूरी की पूरी चश्मा कैनाल खत्म हो चुकी है। अब उसको एडीबी फंड कर रहा था, एडीबी के पैसे थे। तो अब ये एक सवाल उन इदारों से भी बनता है कि अब पूरी की पूरी कैनाल खत्म है तो दूसरे नए सिरे से अब ये शुरू होगी बनना, क्या ये भी उस कास्ट में जाएगी? और इस नहर की वजह से जो फ्लड क्रिएट हुआ, जो उसने नुकसानात किए, जो तबाही और बर्बादी हुई, क्या वो भी कैनाल की कास्ट में जाएगी? मतलब आप कितनी सादगी से कह देते हैं ये कॉस्ट है, ये बेनिफिट है, और बेनिफिशरीज कोई होते हैं, इफेक्टिव्स कोई होते हैं। ये पानी का सवाल तो सराइकी वसेब में सबसे ज्यादा है और इनसे जुड़े हुए जो प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, मतलब कालाबाग डैम है, या अभी ये इस फ्लड के नतीजे में एक नैरेटिव फौरन आके जाता है कि डैम बनाए, जो रट्टा लग जाता है। वो भाई मेरे, आप कह रहे हैं कि ये सबसे बलोचिस्तान में सबसे ज्यादा तबाही नहीं आपके डैमों ने की है। 100 कुछ डैम जो है ना वो टूट चुके हैं और उन्हीं की वजह से पूरा बलोचिस्तान डूब चुका है। आप अपनी एक रिपोर्ट में लिखते हैं कि डीडी खान में जो है ना 80% लोगों को थ्रेट है अर्थक्वेक से, जलजले से। जब 80% लोगों को जलजले की वजह से खतरा रहता है तो कोस्ट सुलेमान रेंज में आप कैसे डैम बनाएंगे? और वो डैम बन गए तो फिर वो रोज कोहियों में जब टूटेंगे या जलजले की वजह से टूटेंगे, वो जब नीचे आके बर्बादी करेंगे तो उनका कौन जिम्मेदार होगा? और उसकी आड़ में समझ नहीं आती। अब बारिशें हुई हैं बलूचिस्तान में, सिंध में, सराइकी रीजन में, और बयानिया आ जाता है कि कालाबाग डैम होता तो ये नुकसान ना होता। सिंध वाली बारिशें बलूचिस्तान वाली हम पाइपलाइन में ले जाते कालाबाग के मकाम पे, या टैंकर में भर के उसको उसमें हम स्टोर करते, तो फ्लड से ये तीनों जो है ना सूबे रीजन जो है वो बच जाते। कितनी आमकाना और स्टूपिड। ये पाकिस्तान में पानी की सियासत सबसे जालमाना और सफाकाना है। और वो सिंध में देखे, सिंध में भी सारी बर्बादी एलबीओडी, आरबीओडी, वर्ल्ड बैंक फंडेड उन प्रोजेक्ट्स ने की है। इधर भी जो बर्बादी हुई है सराइकी रीजन में वो एडीबी के फंडेड चश्मा राइट बैंक कैनाल की वजह से हुई है। हमारी तो जमीन भी हथियाई जा रही है इस पानी की वजह से, क्योंकि जहां जहां ये कैनाल लाते हैं वहां अलॉटमेंट करते हैं, आबादकार को ले आते हैं, मकामी बंदे को बेदखल करते हैं। ये रिकॉर्ड के ऊपर है कि हम थल ग्रेटर कैनाल की मुखालफत कर रहे हैं, हमने सीआरबीसी की मुखालफत की। हम तो मतलब है इस तरह की कोई नहरें नहीं मांग रहे हैं इनसे ना। इनको वो कौन लोग हैं किन, मतलब अगर नहर मेरे लिए है तो मुझसे पूछो। मतलब ये कौन बनाता है मेरे लिए मंसूबे जो मुझसे पूछता नहीं, और वो भी इतने स्टूपिड किस्म के जो करोड़ों लोगों की जिंदगी के साथ खिलवाड़ करते हैं। तो हमारे साथ तो ये हुआ है कि हमारा सूबा ना होने की वजह से, जरा आपको बताऊं, जुल्म ये है कि डेरा गाजी खां और राजनपुर में एडीबी, वर्ल्ड बैंक और दूसरे कुछ इदारों की तरफ से जो सर्वे हुआ है, नुकसान का तखमीना लगाया गया है, वो है कोई तकरीबन 160 अरब रुपए का नुकसान हुआ है इन 2 अजला में सिर्फ, राजनपुर और डेरा गाजी खान में, जो अमेरिकन डॉलर में कम से कम 75 करोड़ डॉलर बनते हैं। और ये अभी तक ना पंजाब गवर्नमेंट की वेबसाइट पे है, ना पीडीएम की वेबसाइट पे है, पंजाब का डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट, और ना एनडीएमए की वेबसाइट के ऊपर है। वहां आप उन वेबसाइट पे जाएं, कोई किसी किस्म का वहां कोई रिकवरी प्लान नहीं है, कोई रिहेबिलिटेशन प्लान नहीं है, कुछ भी नहीं है अभी तक। मतलब हमारा तो अभी इंदराज भी नहीं किया गया, हमारे नुकसान का मतलब है कि वो अंदाजा ही नहीं लगाया गया। अगर ये हमारा अपना सूबा होता, सिंध में कम से कम उनका सूबा होने की वजह से उन्होंने डैशबोर्ड बना दिया है, वहां पे डेटा भी मौजूद है, वहां पे वो रिकवरी चीजें, मतलब है कोई फिगर तो है, कुछ तो है जो छोटा मोटा काम। हम तो उससे भी, ये ताख्त लाहौर की गुलामी की वजह से हम मकबूजा लोग हैं, तो हमारा तो ये भी अभी तक नहीं हो सका। अगर हमारा सूबा होता तो इस तरह कम से कम हमारे साथ ना होता कि हमारा नुकसान आज तक किसी हुकूमती इदारे, किसी ऑफिशियल डॉक्यूमेंट में लिखा तक नहीं गया, जिक्र तक नहीं किया गया।
शुक्रिया फजल साहब, मैं ये इसको थोड़ा सा तर्जुमा कर देता हूँ, और जो वो आपने बात की है वो क्लाइमेट जस्टिस के तनाजुर में उसी को फ्रेम कर देता हूँ। तो what Fazl has sort of responded in terms of the Saraiki demand for an autonomous project, and the politics of water is a matter of life or death for us. And since ignoring, and the thing is that because the worst affected districts in the Punjab province, the current Punjab province, are DJ Khan and Rajanpur, the total estimated loss and damages are around 160 billion rupees, which is about approximately 750 million US dollars. But despite this extensive damage, there has been no sort of game plan made by the provincial government around how to address this issue, how these funds will be distributed. So this is kind of like, in a way, Fazl is sort of referring to this demand by the Pakistani government, a very valid demand for being paid loss and damages for this destruction. But at the same time, within Pakistan, there are issues of regional autonomy and the distribution of these funds, apart from issues of elite capture that needs to be considered, and people's autonomy, people's demand must be put front and center in any plans for mitigation or long-term resolution of these issues. And with these kind of, like, as Fazal has previously described and other panelists have also mentioned, the role of these mega development projects, these canals and the dams, in the exacerbation of this flood. The very reason why water is standing in these areas for so long is because of these infrastructure projects. When these projects are built, they're also used as an ongoing tool of land colonization, a tendency that was started by the British government and has now been continued by the Pakistani state as well. Because whenever there's the new canal project built, new land is irrigated, it also brings settlers from outside those areas. So it's in a way a continuation of that settler colonial mentality, where the indigenous folks, the native residents of that particular land, are not consulted. They're not taken, their wishes are not taken into account. And also the role of the Asian Development Bank, the big funder of the Chashma Right Bank Canal, and the World Bank, and all these institutions that fund these infrastructure projects. Fazil has asked whether you will include the cost of these floods into the cost of these projects, because these projects are very keen on building, investing, and taking out the profit from these investments. But when it comes to recognition that these projects are at the root cause of this destruction, they're not basically including these costs. So it raises a really big question about all our thinking about climate justice and climate reparations as well, because how not only is it that Pakistan should be paid reparation for the simple fact that this situation has been created by emissions by the global north, but also it is by the particular funding and investments by these development banks that have created the infrastructure that causes this destruction. So someone has to be held accountable for that infrastructure as well. Zahra, do you want to take on the next lead towards the final sort of a concluding question? Because I think I see. Yeah, because I think within we need to sort of maybe move towards Q&A session soon. So maybe we give one round of questions to Marvi and Zulfikar together. What do you think?
Yeah, because I think that also Fazal spoke very eloquently to maybe the question of climate justice. And so that was part of our closing questions. The one thing I do want to add is, in your translation was excellent, but something really hit me about what Fazal said that I wanted to like just underline really quickly to make sure that all the English speakers get it, which is that, you know, he spoke to this question of political representation and how important political representation is to making to resistance movements and to really having a stake in what these development projects look like, opposition to them, and so on, and that there is really no plan for this, and these people have not been consulted while these stupid schemes, to directly quote Fazal, have been repeated over and over again. So I think, yes, now I'll quickly move on to as we're running a little short on time. So I'll move on to the closing questions that we had for all three panelists, really. And this is along the lines of, you know, the question of the term of climate change and climate justice. So I wanted to ask, you know, I think Fazal spoke to this, but he can add on, hopefully, that when people talk about climate change in general, what does that actually mean to the people whose lives have been affected by this phenomenon in Saraiki-Vaseba and Sindh? So what does climate justice look like within this local reality? What's important for people? This is, I guess, the question. What is important for people working on climate justice in different parts of the world to understand about the local realities of environmental ruin and devastation in Pakistan? And we can go either way, whoever wants to jump in first.
Can I just talk? Because actually I've turned off my video because my internet isn't working well. Just quickly talk about, as Fazal Saab just mentioned. So I want to mention here that LBOD, as left bank outfall drain, because of its toxic water, you see, has decreased land fertility as well. And because of, let's say, RBOD impact on Manchar Lake as well, the largest lake of clean water in Pakistan. And this has turned into the biggest environmental disaster because of this RBOD, because we have lost various species of migratory birds, fish reduced from 3,000 tons to only 100 tons. Even women lost work on basket weaving from the legs grass. Now, if we just talk about, let's say, the climate justice, so I want to mention here in terms of Pakistan that yes, we need to focus or think about what adaptive models, projects should be introduced which restore our natural waterways. And let's say, of course, the inclusion of folk wisdom, involvement of real inhabitants of land who know more than the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank. So these are the indigenous people who are, let's say, facing the devastation, and they know how to reduce this devastation in coming years. And we also need to talk about the representatives with, who need to be held accountable as they facilitate tycoons like Malik Riaz and destroying our historical places, sites, and actively deforestating. And we also need to, let's say, regularize the real estate housing schemes, which further focuses on the uneven development, or let's say the same British-led colonial development model, which instead of, which instead of focusing or let's say facilitating the real indigenous people or the inhabitants of the land, facilitate the same civil, either let's say military or the bureaucracy, or even within the, let's say, Pakistani government. And I want to mention here, particularly in terms of Sindh, that we need to focus on the restoration of land reforms, because 80% farmers, peasants in Sindh are landless. So land should be distributed to them in order to first, in order to, let's say, stop the devastation in which we are living in. And I just want to quickly talk about that how these kind of mega projects are actually destroying in terms of in terms at our land, because they also cause the water scarcity as well. Within, you see, in 1 year, in just 1 year, in the beginning of this year, we were actually protesting for the water scarcity. Local inhabitants and AWP protested for shortage of the water. And now, after 2 months, we are, let's say, protesting for dewatering from the many areas. So it's also because of the question of climate change, but our governments or authorities need to be held accountable, because lands are actually allotted to them. So we need to see this climate question of climate justice at our, let's say, in my country, Pakistan as well, and those countries who are producing or facilitating the mega projects like LBOD or RBOD. And if I particularly talk about Malir Expressway now as well in Karachi, that funded by Asian Development Bank as well. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. Zulfikar, would you like to jump in on this question of climate justice? You know, what would it look like? What are the kinds of things that we can practically push for? Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'll also be going videoless because I've also had an issue with internet, but as long as everyone can hear me, I think that was beautifully, succinctly put, actually. I don't have too much to add. I can only just very much enthusiastically agree with what was said. Climate justice is not simply a matter of the outside in, it's also a matter of the inside in as well, our own responsibility to our people. And I think Pakistan now, what these floods have revealed and what the media is not showing, what the Pakistani media is distracting the population from right now with this sort of political fiasco happening in Punjab at the moment, in North Punjab at the moment, is that there is, you know, people are very, very angry. They have not been given justice for a very, very long time. And I do want to emphasize this idea around land reform. You know, Marvi brought up a lot of things which shows up the complex, interconnected nature of Pakistan's issues. But, you know, we need land reform because we're faced with two options in Pakistan: constitutional revolution or popular revolution, which will likely be a bloody revolution, because the way that class is segregated in Pakistan is so unjust. And of course, I will say that I'm a part of that too. And many people in Pakistan who are working on climate justice are also a part of that. You know, there's a lot of people that feed into the system as well. But land reform is one of the few forms of constitutional revolution that are actually available to us, because landlessness is what is causing starvation as well. So I do just, that's the only thing I think I'd like to just emphasize that Marvi brought up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Zulfikar. I mean, I think just one thing I'll quickly add is that I think what has been said here has been really clarifying for me for thinking in much more complex ways about even what we mean by climate reparations. So how is it that there are multiple scales at which that can operate? फजल, आप कुछ ऐड करना चाहेंगे इस क्लाइमेट जस्टिस के सवाल पे? आपने पहले बहुत अच्छे से क्लियरली जोरदार तरीके से बिल्कुल समझाया है कि क्लाइमेट जस्टिस क्या होगी, लेकिन अगर आपके दिमाग में कुछ और आ रहा है इस वक्त और आप ऐड करना चाहते तो वो टू मेक श्योर कि
जरूर
आपको
जरूर एक दो बात मैं जरूर करूंगा क्लाइमेट जस्टिस पे। एक तो ये जो टर्म है क्लाइमेट जस्टिस, ये अब सिंधी सराइकी और बलोच के लिए हैरान कौन है कि भाई मौसम का इंसाफ क्या मतलब। और वो एक क्लाइमेट जस्टिस को पाकिस्तान जो मतलब एक खास रकम के साथ जोड़ देना कि ये 30 अरब डॉलर तो क्लाइमेट जस्टिस हो गया, ये मेरी समझ में नहीं आ रहा। अच्छा, उससे ये अब हो भी जाता है तो ये आप ले भी आते हैं, तो उसमें जो इफेक्टिव्स हैं जिन्होंने सफर किया है, जो तबाह बर्बाद हैं, तो इस क्लाइमेट जस्टिस में वो कहाँ हैं? इतनी थोड़ी सी बात करनी थी मतलब। और फिर हम उनसे कह रहे हैं मतलब इसका जिम्मेदार हम भी कितना सादा है मीर, बीमार हुए जिनके सबब उसी अत्तार के लौंडे से दबा लेते हैं।
Wow, Fazil Saima. I've as usual, I'll try to uh, quickly give a summary translation of this. Fazil has this beautiful knack with words, which I can't replicate. So you're missing out if you're not understanding Urdu, but that's your loss. Fazil had a very brief comment about the term climate justice. It's a very kind of a alien and incomprehensible term for Sindhi, Saraiki, Balochi people, like the justice of the climate. And then taking this kind of term and this kind of approach and just linking a dollar value, like a $30 billion loss, with that kind of like thing also doesn't make sense. It's a much deeper and more layered and complex thing. And as Fazil had very articulated very well in the previous response around issues of representation and voice and self-representation and self-sovereignty are the most primary ones. The control of the land and the water by the people of that land and water. And the terms in all this debate, the effectees are also nowhere to be seen, like their own voices, their own wishes are nowhere to be seen in this debate about climate justice. Thank you.
I think also, thank you so much, Essen, for the translation. Marvi wanted to add something really quickly about how this question of climate justice particularly affects women and the suffering of women through this particular devastation. Marvi, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zara, for asking this. That you see, in every catastrophe or disaster, women and children suffer the most. And a number of women already have been going through psychological traumas as leaving their homes or, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes,
all right.
we can hear you.
Yes. All right. So you see, they are going through let's say they are traumatized as leaving their homes or even seeing the dead bodies of their beloved ones. And many were even afraid of sharing the trauma that had overwhelmed them completely. I want to talk about especially here that no facility of toilets in tent cities or even camps, that it's even mind-boggling to imagine that one has to wait for a whole day to get darkness in order to use toilet, actually without toilet. And it creates severe pain for pregnant women because of the inability to sanitary and sitting for hours and hours on the ground without even any medical care and going through the labor pains, again, without proper medical relief and so on. And some of the women also shared that what they felt because having no any breastfeed, and were saying that even we couldn't feed our newborn babies, and the officials have snatched from us these small moments of our happiness. I just want to quickly talk about the harassment as well, that some of the women, especially young ones, have been facing harassment, especially in terms of intrusive steering that further restricts women to be stayed only in tents all the time. And recently, an affectee was gang raped in Karachi. There could be other cases as well, but because they are not reported, either of cultural constraints or our patriarchal ideology as well. Some of the women, because of cultural constraints, had to suffer from severe fever and other diseases because they were not allowed to be diagnosed by male doctors as well. Others were sharing the painful experiences of, seeing their release or sewing machines and collection of small things for their daughters to be washed away by water with, let's say, with the hopelessness in their eyes. So yes, they are suffering from a number of problems. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's time that we're about 15 minutes over the time that I had planned to open up to Q&A. So Esin, should we open it up? There are 2 questions in the Q&A now, maybe 3, yes. I believe that you should just type in your questions in the Q&A. I'm not very familiar with this webinar format, but I don't think that it's possible to ask them. Perhaps it is. I'm checking on it right now. But in the meantime, I'll read out the first question, and it's for Marvi. And then maybe we can, the second question is for Fazal. So Esin, I'll ask you to translate it if that's okay. So the first question is for you, Marvi, which is that now that we've gone through this huge catastrophe, we are well aware that the future won't be any better. What measures do you think we can take to train our people in terms of disaster management, medical trainings, and the health of affected children, as health has a long-term impact? And this question's been asked by Ariba Asad.
Okay, thank you for this question. First of all, I don't think so that we need to train our people. Yes, to some extent we can, but it's the Pakistani government, and especially federal and our provincial government, which need to require to restore all the natural flows, as I have already mentioned, that natural waterways, which actually were required to restore in 2013. But since then, we haven't seen any kind of development so far. And we need to, hold our representatives accountable that, dams have elevated vulnerability. So why we are still asking for the dams? And as we have just mentioned, the thing about the land reforms as well. And also, stopping the deforestation as well on the coastal belt. So it's, I would say that people just consider that it's the responsibility of the common. Yes, it is our ethical responsibility as well to go for the deforestation as well, and stopping deforestation and other things. But again, I would emphasize that such catastrophes can be stopped, restrained only if they are literally true to their indigenous people, or think about the people, think about those projects which are for people, for their betterment, not instead, anti-people or anti-ecology development projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Marvi. Esin, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll read the English and then ask Fazal. So the question is by Azul Ashari from Pride. My question is to Fazil Rab is that what is the relationship between land grabbing and development of irrigation system canal? And what are the real issues of native people in canal colonization of Saraiki State? Fazil Singh, आपसे सवाल है अजल लाशारी प्राइड से, वो पूछ रहे हैं कि ये लैंड ग्रैब और कनाल इरिगेशन सिस्टम की डेवलपमेंट में आपस में क्या ताल्लुक है, और जो सराइकी वसेब की कनाल कॉलोनाइजेशन है उसकी वजह से वहाँ के नेटिव आदिवासियों को क्या रियल इश्यूज क्या सामना करना पड़ रहा है?
वैसे इसका थोड़ा जिक्र तो इस सवाल का मैं अपनी गुफ्तगू में भी कर चुका हूँ। तो इसको देखते हैं कि थर्ड फेज ग्रेटर थल कैनाल का जो शुरू हुआ है ये इतना जुड़ा हुआ है, ये पानी और जमीन का मसला। यक जुम्बा से कलम 80,000 एकड़ फौज को इलाट कर दी गई है थल के अंदर। और इस तरह के जितने मंसूबे हैं, ये सारे के सारे सरायकी वसेब की जमीन लूटने के लिए हैं। इरिगेशन के, कैनाल इरिगेशन के जितने प्रोजेक्ट्स हैं, वो सिर्फ और सिर्फ उनकी निगाह सरायकी रीजन, सरायकी वसेब की जो है जमीन के ऊपर है। और नेटिव के साथ वो फिर सफर करता है। एक तो मकामी बंदा वहां से बेदखल हो जाता है, लैंडलेस हो जाता है, और जो हमारी रकूक है, चरागाह है, जंगलात हैं, वो सारे के सारे खत्म होते जा रहे हैं। अब मतलब थल लाइव स्टॉक की जगह है, नेहरू की जगह नहीं है, जहां पे अब रकूक का खात्मा और रकूक की इलाटमेंट हो रही है। तो मकामी बंदा जो थल का है, वो चन्ने, बाजरा और गवार के कास्ट के अलावा और कोई कास्ट जानता नहीं है। वो भी नेचुरल मतलब ऑर्गेनिक बारिश के ऊपर करता है। तो कैनाल इरिगेशन या कैनाल एग्रीकल्चर से तो वाकिफ नहीं है। उसकी तो जिंदगी का जो गुजर बसर है वो लाइफ स्टॉक के ऊपर है। जब लाइफ स्टॉक के बंदे को आप रकूक से, जंगलात से, चरागाह से बेदखल कर रहे हैं, उससे आप उसकी जिंदगी छीन रहे हैं, उसका पूरे का पूरी उसकी शनाख्त छीन रहे हैं। ये नहर इस तरह की जो है, इनके जो प्रोजेक्ट हैं, मैंने शुरू में कहा था, ये हमारे लिए जिंदगी और मौत का मसला है। मैं अपने घर में जो है ना, वो अजनबी बनता जा रहा हूं, मेरी शनाख्त खत्म होती जा रही है। मेरी चरागाहें, मेरे जानवर, मेरे परिंदे, मेरा माहौल, मेरी हवा, ये तो सब कुछ बर्बाद कर रहे हैं। मकामी आदमी किसी एक चीज में नहीं, वो माहौल में जब हमारे रकूक काटे जाते हैं या उन पे कब्जा करके उनको साफ करके उस पे कोई पावर का प्रोजेक्ट लगाया जाता है, इलेक्ट्रिसिटी का, बिजली का, या उस पे कैनाल आती है, मकामी बंदा तो जब तक वो 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 किलोमीटर रोजाना चलता नहीं है, वो तो बीमार हो जाता है। हम तो अपनी धरती पे एलियन हो चुके हैं। अब आबादकार हमें ऐसे देखता है हम किसी दूसरे सियारे से आए हैं। इस तरह के इनके जो नेहरू के मंसूबे हैं, वो तो हमें सीधी सीधी मौत ही दे रहे हैं। इससे तो मौत एक बार आ जाए वो बेहतर है।
शुक्रिया फजल साई, मैं ट्रांसलेट करता हूँ इसको। So Fazil is saying that the some of these issues he has addressed already, but projects like the third phase of the Greater Thal Canal, which is a canal colonization project, one of the big intent is the occupation of land and land grabbing. So as soon as the project is introduced with just a single stroke of the pen, 80,000 acres of land has been allotted to the army. And all of these projects in the Saraiki regions are in effectively land grabbing projects. And the natives are suffering from these projects, and they're being evicted, they're being rendered landless. And but more than that, the entirety of their life and their life worlds is being taken away from them. Their very identity is being taken away from them when they are transformed, when these projects grab land and transform pastures and forests and rakuk, specific kinds of commons that have existed in these areas for centuries. When these are taken away from the people, it's not just that they're evicted and displaced. The local people, who are primarily people who are livestock herders, they are familiar with growing certain crops organically through rain-fed irrigation. When you take away that land and transform these lands from rain-fed pasture lands into something different and allocate this to the army, or build a power project on top of that, or colonize it using canal irrigation, then you're taking away basically this the life of the you're stealing their lives, you're stealing the identity of the native people. And it's so much so that they've become strangers in their own land. When their pastures, when the birds, when the animals also flee, then this colonization turns natives aliens within their own lands. The outsider becomes the landowners and the natives become alien.
Thank you, Asin. I'll just go to the next question. Thank you, Fazil, for the response. The next question is from Abdur Rahman, and it's whether the green patches across the blue landscape of Sindh after the floods represented a case of the powerful landlords saving their lands or otherwise. I believe this is a question for Marvi because you mentioned this, but I think Zulfikar, if you want to jump into with your experience of those areas, feel free to do so. And Fazil, अगर आपको भी अगर इस तरह का कुछ सराय की वसेब में भी देखा गया है तो आप भी प्लीज बताइएगा. I think we can potentially take multiple answers to this. It's really an empirical question if I'm understanding it correctly.
नहीं, सराय की वसेब में तो खैर इस तरह का कोई वाकया नहीं है. सराय की वसेब में इस तरह कुछ नहीं हुआ. कुछ सिंध का है दोस्तों का तजर्बा तो मुझे अंदाजा नहीं है.
ठीक. Marvi, have you seen these green patches that Abdur Rahman is referring to, whether they're the case of powerful landlords saving their lands or otherwise?
You see, I think I've mentioned earlier that let's say that landlords are very powerful in Sindh and they command, as I just mentioned, administrative power, political power and economic power. So yes, in order to save their lands, they have inundated a number of crops of local inhabitants and even saving their, let's say, powerful farms as well. They just made a further devastation. As I've mentioned the examples in terms of Padin, and also you see all the areas, if you see the Kambar Shadat Kot area, Khairpur Nathan Shah area. So yes, they were actually a number of breaches because of these landlords so that they can save their lands. And it is not only landlords, let's say land, but these lands are also allotted to military as well and some bureaucrats as well. So it's kind of means they all are connected to each other, this power politics. So yes, I totally agree. And you see this case is not only particular to 2022, but we have seen that in 2010 as well, that landlords had just gone to breaching the embankment banks in order to save their lands. Thank you. I just want if Sir Zulfikar can talk or may talk something about it. Thank you.
So before you get into it, Zulfikar, I'll just, there's another question directed towards you. I'll just add that there.
I think we lost Zulfikar Hasan. I think he just.
Okay.
So maybe we go to the next question if you want.
Okay, so I will actually try to, there's a couple of questions that go sort of together in that sort of way. And the question really is being asked that, and I think some of these questions have been addressed, but maybe they can be elaborated. So there has been a lot of blame towards the government, GM has mentioned, apart from blaming the government, what can we do to avoid these kind of floods? And then within that sort of, there's a question about, so if dams are not that important or they're devastating, then how can we preserve water and sort of store water when the scarcity hits? So I think I'm sort of gonna just put them together in that sort of category of what is kind of like the possible solutions, even though these dams and these infrastructure are managing towards are pushing towards more destruction and disaster, but there are issues about scarcity and that needs to be addressed. So what can the government do? What can be the possible solutions? So if anyone can jump into this question, I think Fazil Sain, you आपने जब वो थोड़ी सी solutions की बात करें कि अगर dams नहीं तो क्या, तो आपने थोड़ा सा तो रोध कोही की बात की थी कि रोध कोही इरिगेशन में अगर आप उसमें कोई इजाफा करना चाहें कि भाई पानी की किल्लत भी तो एक मसला होगा, तो इसका आपके जहन में कोई solution की तरफ या कोई फॉर्मूला हो चाहे वो डायरेक्ट कोई टेक्निकल सोल्यूशन ना भी हो, तो किस तरह से इनको टैकल किया जा सकता है इन प्रॉब्लम्स को?
ये बलूचिस्तान की मतलब अब या सराइकी रीजन की, सिंध की इतनी उम्र थोड़ी नहीं है। मतलब मेहरगढ़ जब 7000 साल पहले बसता था तो उन्होंने डैम नहीं बनाए थे। बलूचिस्तान का पूरा सिस्टम या कोसुलेमान का, सराइकी रीजन का, सराइकी वसेब का, मतलब उसके जो मैंने कहा था कि ये बैंक कच्चे मड के बनाए जाते थे, कंक्रीट के नहीं होते थे। उससे पानी की प्रॉपर तकसीम होती थी। उसमें पाइना सरोपा, ये जो रोदकुई की लैंग्वेज है, टेल एंड हेड, उसमें पूरे के पूरे वाटर राइट्स हैं। और पानी के कुदरती जो तलाई कहते हैं, तलाब कहते हैं, रिजर्वायर नेचुरल जो है वो ऑलरेडी मौजूद हैं। कारेज सिस्टम मौजूद है। मतलब जरूरी नहीं है कि हर चीज का हल सिर्फ डैम ही है। मतलब 7000 साल का कदीम मेहरगढ़, मतलब वो भी तो रहते थे पानी का मतलब मसले, वो उन्होंने कोई डैम नहीं बनाए थे। बलूचिस्तान की मिसाल उसने बलूचिस्तान को कोट किया खसूसन। मतलब हजारों सालों से जरूरी नहीं है कि आप नेचर के हर सिस्टम के अंदर या नेचर के उसमें मदाखलत करें तो आप पानी स्टोर कर सकते हैं, और कोई जराए नहीं है। नेचुरल जो तलाइयां हैं, जो पॉन्ड्स हैं, वो उनसे पानी हम मतलब सैकड़ों साल का तो लोग ओरली बता रहे हैं। मतलब ये जो एक फ्रॉड किया गया है कि इससे पहले इतनी बड़ी बारिशें नहीं होंगी। मतलब मैंने जब बात की अपने बड़ों से, बुजुर्गों से, तो 70 से 100 साल के दरमियान के लोगों से, उन्होंने कहा है कि हमने इससे बड़े बड़े लोड मतलब फ्लड और रोध को यहाँ देखी है। ये कहाँ अंदराज है कि इससे पहले इतनी बड़ी बारिशें नहीं हुई थी? ये किसके रिकॉर्ड में है? आपका रिकॉर्ड कितने साल तक जाता है? तो डैम के अलावा जो लोगों का सदियों का जो तजर्बा है, जो पहले जिस तरह लोग पानी को मतलब के करते थे स्टोर, तो वो तरीके हैं, उनको अप्लाई मकामी लोगों से मशावरत के बाद वो सबसे बेहतर तरीके से, क्योंकि उनका उस माहौल के साथ, पानी के साथ हजारों सालों का तजर्बा है। वो जो नस्ल दर नस्ल एक दूसरे को मुंतकिल हो रहा है। जरूरी नहीं है कि आपकी इंजीनियरिंग हर जगह फिट बैठे। अब इससे निकलें जरा।
सही। Shukriya, Fazil Singh. So, in response to this question about the solution and the dams, Fazil starts by saying that the age of Balochistan and Sindh is not like it's not small. It has these are these are places where ancient civilizations were born. Mehrgarh, for instance, is 7,000 years old, and these civilizations did not require concrete and large dams. And Fazal also referred to his earlier answer that in these arid areas, there have been several sophisticated technologies of water management, including the spade irrigation, Road Kohi, which has its own sort of dynamics of the construction of mud embankments and proper rights for the head and the tail users. These are collectively and communally built structures. Then we have the Karez infrastructure in Balochistan, which has been devastated by the introduction of modern pump irrigation or groundwater extraction technologies. So these solutions were the solutions used by these people who did not interfere in the natural system, but they were in line and in sync with these natural system. And we know this from our oral tradition. We know this from the knowledge and wisdom of our elders. So Fazil mentions that this rain event has been classified as unprecedented, but when he spoke to his elders, who they have seen such massive flows in these torrents in their 70, 100 years lifespan. So these figures are also sort of a fraud, a kind of like a false narrative that has been built about the scale of these disasters, because these areas have a history of 7,000 years long, and people have survived there and thrived in these areas and have seen floods that are much bigger than the levels that we are seeing right now. And people know the solution. Local people, the indigenous people that have lived on this land, that have lived with this land over generations, transferred the knowledge over generation. And so that those are the solutions. Those are the people that we should be listening to. in every place. You cannot just insert engineering and interfere with environmental flows or natural systems and expect not to face these kind of disasters and destruction.
अच्छा सही में एक छोटी सी बात आखिर में वो जरूरी है कहना
जी
कि
जी प्लीज
अगर हमने आने वाले दिनों में इस तरह के नुकसानात से बचना है और इस फ्लड से महफूज रहना है तो पानी को आजादाना तौर पे बहने का रास्ता दो दरिया सिंध तक और समंदर के अंदर तक
right
बस
right. So Fazal wants to add that if we need to save ourselves from destruction of this kind in the future, then the water needs to be given a free path to flow to the Indus and then to the ocean. That is the only solution.
Thank you, Fazal or Esin. I think that response actually is a very pithy and a concise response to Jeevan's question, which was Jeevan from Namal, who asked, we've discussed the reasons for the cause of floods, but what are the solutions? So that is one a very clear solution. I want to move to two questions and combine them or ask them sequentially for Zulfikar. One is from GM, where GM is asking if Zulfikar, you said that Karachi is disconnected from the rest of Sindh. He wanted a clarification on in what terms do you see it as disconnected? And then the second question is from Sapna from Qaid-e-Azam University, who is asking that, or mentioning the recent example of the collapse of Morbi Bridge in India. And referencing that, she's asking that along with climate change, how do you look at the life of the barrages of Sindh? Almost 7 canals are part of Sakkar Barrage, but after the flood of 2022, because of the rise of water in it, it was at the verge of collapse. I think that question is connected to this discussion that we've just been having about the life of these large infrastructures. But perhaps you can answer both of them, Zulfikar.
Yes. I do think they're both quite separate, but I want to again, this point emphasizes Fazal Sain's argument, which is that there have been indigenous modes of irrigation for thousands of years. So it's not that we learned canal irrigation from the British, it's more that the British learned canal irrigation from us. And in fact, when they built Sakkar Barrage, it was with intent to have a much more, with intent to put much more water in some canals that were already existing, that were built by the Talpurs and the Koloras and various other, well, I don't know if I'd say indigenous. Indigenous is a funny word to use, I think, in Pakistan, but because Talpurs and Koloras, I don't think they were actually indigenous, but they are as close to indigenous as maybe we can get in some ways. But pre-British, let's say, irrigation systems that existed. So what Sakkar Barrage basically tried to intensify a lot of the sort of the canal irrigation that was already existing, and add to it and do all sorts of things that would alter the landscape to this day. Now, what is the future of Sakkar Barrage? I mean, of course, I'm speaking as an artist with a deep concern for the environment and the river, who's done research independently. I'm not speaking as an engineer. I just want to put that out first and foremost. I think Sakkar Barrage is a dinosaur. I think it's a monument to an outdated way of thinking. It's a monument to a very machoistic way of thinking of our river. It's a very arrogant way of thinking about our river. And it's had a really, really destructive consequence. And I think the Pakistani government does recognize this. I think other forms of the Pakistani establishment do not. And they're still thinking that dams are the issue. We have this really strange anxiety around storing water that borders on kind of on like unhealthy obsession, a pathological in some way, I think, as opposed to water drainage, which is actually very, very important. And these dams and barrages, they've affected the community and the history, especially in Sindh. You know, Sindh is a very syncretic province in which the river is sacred to both Hindus and Muslims. And Sakhar is one of the few places where this still exists because the river is still at its pre-irrigation flow in this area. So I do just want to say that. Now, in terms of what is the future, I think the future looks, you know, I think if we're able to unify, and if we're able to build our infrastructure in a way that is pro-people and pro-ecology and pro-nature and pro-indigenous, yes, we might be able to find a solution looking forward. But so many people now depend on this canal irrigation system that we have to be really, 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 really creative. And this is where we're stuck, is how do we get out of this rut? And I think, like Sain Fazil said, it's through listening to indigenous people, the people of the Indus. The Saraiki, you know, the Indus has its own language, actually, Hindko, Saraiki, and Sindhi. You know, if you move 60 kilometers left or right of the river Indus, the language changes. So the Indus itself has its own culture. And it's important to listen to these stakeholders. Yes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And the disconnection of Karachi. I think that's a very long conversation. It's politically more disconnected than geographically disconnected. But I think I'll leave it at that because we don't have time.
Thank you, Zulfikar. I think we have to wrap up. We're at 2 minutes. I know there's a lot more that we can talk about. I will just say, just very quickly, thank you so much to our panelists for bringing their incredible insights and sharing them so generously with this audience. I can speak personally for me that I think hearing these perspectives as alternatives and critiques of technical expertise was really, really enlightening. And I think it really helped me think much more expansively about the kinds of solutions we can see in the future. So we just hope to keep this conversation going in however many ways. Thank you so much for attending. Essen, if you want to share a few words in closing.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just sort of double down on that, and I have the privilege of really having learned from people like Fazil and to sort of see them in action on the ground, people like Marvi. The organizers in these places do excellent work, and we are glad to serve some kind of a vessel to have them come to these platforms and speak rather than the late minute fashion climate expert. And so it's really this deep knowledge and wisdom that we need in order to find the solution to these very difficult problems that we're facing right now. So thank you all. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Sarah. And hopefully we can continue this conversation on other forums as well.
Thank you, everybody.